So let me introduce myself. My name is Amwaba Gooden, and I am the current interim vice president of the Division of Equity, I should say Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And I'm also currently the chair of the Department of Pan-African Studies. I thank you for joining us. And I'm going to have Dr. Hilton will introduce himself.
Good evening, Kent State. It's good to be with you all this evening. I am Lamar Hilton. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs here at Kent State, and I'm looking forward to a great conversation and engagement this evening with you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hilton. So again, thank you all for coming. For most of you, we're here because of the recent killing of Mr. Floyd, and which has brought so many people to the streets. It's certainly a multi-ethnic and multi-generational uprising that we're seeing across the nation. And for some, it is a specific killing, but for others, it's the long trajectory of dehumanization of Black men and women, but particularly Black men, that has caused this current uprising. And so we're seeing an international, right, and national movement to address anti-Black racism and systemic structural racism. So this town hall in particular is to bring us into kind of a first step of conversation, because we know that we have to be proactive and we have to be collaborative in whatever we do. So Lamar and I are here to engage you in that conversation, kind of first steps in this conversation. So some of you are certainly here to listen and to learn. Many of you might be wondering what next. And some of you might actually have suggestions. So we want to thank you for coming. We know this is an individual and collective effort, but that together we can help shape an equitable and just society. There are actually also students here, and so this is kind of an all community conversation, and we'll have multiple conversations as the summer unfolds. I'm actually going to introduce to you now Todd Daikon, as well as Moema Futara. Moema is actually the former curator of the Umbaji Gallery, located in the Department of Pan-African Studies and in the Center for Pan-African Culture. Moema just also recently retired after many years of working in global education at Kent State University. And Todd is the 13th president of Kent State University. He's been president since 2019. He's an advocate for student success, has more than 30 years of experience in higher education. And as a provost, Todd really advocated for student retention, graduation rates, but also to recruit and promote faculty and staff of color. So Todd and Moema, we welcome you to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Amawab. It's good to be here. Welcome, everyone, especially our students, faculty, and staff. I think it's important for me to begin by stating publicly why I am here. Certainly, I'm here to acknowledge racism and specifically anti-Black racism. And I'm here because of the horrific murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many others. And I want to acknowledge here the deep historical and structural roots of racism, something I know intellectually as an historian, something I know intellectually as an historian of Brazil in particular, but something that many of you know from your lived experiences, which I certainly respect and I look forward to learning more about in the near future. And Moema and I are certainly committed to racial equity. We're committed to supporting anti-racist work. And I want to thank in particular Vice Presidents Gooden and Hilton for their leadership, and particularly for their advice and their teaching of me over the past few days. Soon we're going to announce steps we will take to combat racism, including the creation of an anti-racism task force at Kent State. And again, I want to thank Amawab and Lamar for their leadership. So now, turn things over to my wife, Moema Lacerda Furtado, who will say a few words. And again, thank you all.
Hi, good evening. I'm here to support these events and to continue to work towards ending any form of racism. These despicable acts against our citizens that continue to happen for centuries have to stop. These disgusting acts have kept our Black population humiliated, afraid, and not fully able to navigate this society with ease. We need to work for the day when Black mothers don't need to worry if their kids will be harassed, humiliated, or killed that day. Thank you.
Thanks, Amawaba.
Thank you. Thank you both for attending. I really appreciate it. And I do want to share that Lamar and I have asked Todd and the rest of the cabinet members not to stay for the entire part of this town hall conversation. It was really important for us to provide a space for staff, faculty, and students to feel that they could be at ease and as honest as they can with the issues that are facing us, but particular issues that are facing Kent State. Todd will join the Ally, How to Be an Ally conversation, which will occur next Thursday at 5 p.m. And people will also get an invite to that. And he'll also join us in another conversation, a community-based conversation, where he will engage us in conversations around race and racism in particular. So, but I do thank them both for joining and the other cabinet members that are here.
Thanks
Thank
again,
you.
Amawaba.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I had said earlier, I'm still admitting people into this conversation and it's rising. So I'm sorry if I seem a little distracted. So Lamar and I are going to work in tandem with answering some questions. Some questions were actually sent to us through the previous emails, and we'll try and get to those. But if you could also use the hand raise function or the chat function, actually, we'll try and answer the questions that way. Okay, so I think Lamar is going to start us off with going through some of the questions we were asked earlier.
Absolutely. So again, thanks so much for your time. And also thanks to those who did submit questions in advance. We reviewed these questions every last submission. We have a synopsis of every last question that has come in. And the questions are so powerful. They're so complex. They really cause Amawaba and I to really think deeply and meaningfully on how we would respond and how we would keep open and honest and transparent dialogue at the forefront of tonight's conversation. So I think I'm going to take the questions in random order, but I do want to start with the question of what tangible action is Kent State University taking and or planning to take to create change for Black and Brown communities, to create change around systemic racism, to create change around anti-Black racism for our institution. And I want to be clear that this was the most asked question of all of the questions we received. And what it reminded us about is that while these national and societal injustices are happening all over the country, we have work to do right here in our own backyard. We have work to do right here on our campus. We have work here to do on behalf of our students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, et cetera. And so I was very appreciative to see this question contextualized in the setting of our current institution, because it illuminates the notion that, yes, these injustices are happening. Yes, we're furious, we're angry, we're hurt, we're sad, we're a ball of emotions. But on the everyday lived experience of those who live, learn, and work at Kent State, there's work yet to be done. And so I start by asking you, Amawaba, can you share just some of the tangible actions that we as an institution are planning to take for creating change for Black and Brown communities?
Okay, so I'll start by talking about a little of the work that we did last year. So last year, all of the vice presidents participated in a semester-long institute. University of Southern California leads a Race and Racial Equity Institute. Every cabinet members, as well as 5 key stakeholders across the campus participated in that institute. So Pam Grimm, for example, who I think is on the call, participated, as well as the dean at a regional campus, Denise Seacrest, Jim Blank for the Arts and Science, Ebony Pringle, Dean of University College, participated in that institute. And for me, that is one of the initial steps, although there had been others in the past, but in this current moment, I can point to that as a step in terms of the cabinet really paying attention to issues around structural racism and to really move away from and not really dismissing the impact or the work that has to be done in terms of race relations, but really begin to look at structural and systemic racism that's embedded in practice. And it actually also speaks for me to the fact that, systemic racism exists oftentimes without action, right? So you have to look at policies, procedures, and process that have embedded these structures within systems. So that's one of the steps that I could speak to. Kent State also has an ad hoc committee on race that came out of the GPI, the Great Place Initiative Committee. And that committee, and I know Sonia Williams is on the call also, is consisted of members from the faculty, from the staff, and from the students. And that committee actually made specific recommendations that we will pick up again in the fall. But in this moment in time, what Dr. Hilton and I, as well as Melody Tankersley, has proposed is this, and as you've heard President Daikon address it, is that we will create an anti-racism task force that will actually examine how race and racism persist and exist at Kent State University, and then take recommendations from that committee to act on it. And I say that not to say that it's only one committee that is going to do this work, right? The work is both collective and it's individual. It's both at the smallest unit as well as the largest unit. It's only together that we're going to address these issues. And so what has really warmed me is the amount of emails I receive from chairs and directors about some of the proactive measures that they're taking in their department to address anti-Black racism, such as forming an anti-racism task force at the college level or at the department level, picking up diversity equity programs that exist but might have been ignored. So I'm really hopeful and thankful that this is happening.
Yeah, it's great. And I think there's been a lot of questions tangential to that about how are we creating those activism opportunities for students, for staff, for faculty who want to be a part of the discussion and, more importantly, want to be a part of the change, want to be a part of the action. Yes. And so this anti-racism task force really gives us a platform and a foundation to do that in a really thoughtful and coordinated way. Yes. So that way we can address the full gamut of needs relative to racism and systematic and structural racism at Kent State. I know for me, it's been amazing to watch our students really engage with this topic of discussion. You may know that Saturday there was a rally sponsored by our Black United students that drew hundreds of people to Kent. I participated along with Amwaba and my family was there, my wife, my kids, and I really was really felt like inspired by what I saw, by the activism our students have continued to demonstrate. Make no mistake about it, Kent State University is an activist campus to its core and in its fabric and its DNA, and certainly that activism rings true even today. In talking with our student leaders, there's still yet work to be done. And so our students are also going to host a similar town hall discussion for just students coming up that will be sponsored by our Black United students and our undergraduate student government. I've been in contact with Tasia Hines, who's the president of BUS, and Tiara Moore, who is the president of USG, to make sure that we are deploying the resources that are needed to support that effort so that students can have their voices heard. My understanding of that engagement is that they will compile a list of things that the university needs to focus in on relative to race as it pertains to the student experience and from the student lens that then will be presented to the administration for dialogue and discussion. I've already told Dr. Gooden that we need to incorporate that feedback very centrally, very meaningfully at the forefront and at the onset of our conversations. The Anti-Racism Task Force is designed to have a very strong representation of students. And so we hope that there will be opportunity to connect these bodies of work in a really coordinated way, as I shared earlier, so that we can be diligent and nimble in addressing the issue at hand.
Yeah. And one of the things I think both Lamar, that's really important to Lamar and I, is that we recognize that students are the experts in their own experience. And that in that recognition, we know that they have much value. And when we look at this generation, we're thinking of just Black Lives Matter in particular, and it is that young student energy that's really pushing for change. And that's really carving out a space, right, for us older folks to step into change. And I so much appreciate the work that they're doing.
So Dr. Gooden, these things are good, but where do we have work to do? Where are our shortcomings as an institution? I think it would be disingenuous in a moment like this to tout all of the wonderful things that we're doing at Kent State without also addressing where the gaps are.
Yeah, I mean, the work that Kent State has to do, like any other institution, is huge. The gaps are both qualitative and they're quantitative. It's interesting, if we think about the 4 town halls that we're having 4 town halls. It's general town hall. We'll have a town hall tomorrow that's geared towards Black, African American, and other people of color in terms of how they identify, to create a space for that group to have a conversation. We're having a town hall on how to be an ally, and we're having a town hall for students, geared towards students. And I think the students are doing 2 town halls, right, Lamar? So that there actually tells you kind of the work that needs to be done. I know qualitatively the experiences of faculty, staff, and students on this campus leaves a lot to be desired, right? So we have anecdotally evidence from all pockets of the university that staff are discriminated against, faculty as well as students. And that there's not necessarily, there appears to be a lack of coordination on how people can actually report their experience around discrimination. That's something that we want to address right away. Quantitatively, we know that the faculty does not represent, right? Our students are asking for more faculty of color, faculty that look like them. And they're also asking for curriculum that reflects their experience. They want diversity, right, in the knowledge that, in terms of what they're learning in the classroom, right? I know that's something that's really important in terms of the quality and the content of their education, as they're asking for that. And those are just some of the things. I know other people on the call will actually have other things to add to that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think in addition to what you've noted, we have this anecdotal evidence, but we also have some pretty concrete ways of knowing quantitatively and qualitatively. I remember onboarding a few years ago now, as the Dean of Students. And one of my readings in preparation for interviewing for this job was the university's climate study. And I remember reading, the hundreds of pages that the climate study yielded, and then getting the job and getting here, and we were already underway with the work of the Great Place Initiative. And the way that group was even constructed was, there were heightened issues across all populations, students, faculty, and staff, relative to race. And so this has been a pervasive issue for Kent State. I know that our students right now are sharing their experiences via Twitter. If you are on Twitter, I would invite you to search the hashtag Black at Kent State. Black at Kent State is student accounts of their experiences as Black students at this institution. And I have read some of the most horrific stories via that hashtag. Students' experiences in the classroom with faculty members and microaggressions, student experiences with the police in both the university setting as well as the city of Kent. Students' experiences with their own peers, their white peer counterparts, in terms of furthering racist rhetoric and microaggressions. And so we still have work to do in those spaces to rid ourselves of those types of behaviors.
Thank you.
So there's a question here, and let me make sure that I am reading this question correctly. It comes from an assistant professor in psychology. It's a multi-part question, and the questions read, does Kent State have any partnerships with HBCUs for inter-institutional scholarship and research and recruitment of graduate students? If not, how will Kent State pursue this? And if such a partnership or partnerships exist, how can faculty become involved, and how can this partnership be better communicated to the university community?
So to the best of my knowledge, there's not a current partnership that Kent State has with a historically Black university or college. We did have a staff member in the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion who worked in terms of recruiting Black faculty and grad students in particular, but this is something that currently DEI is interested in exploring and continuing, because I think it's an important connection to make.
Yeah. There's a question here from a student. Does the college plan to work with the City of Kent and the Kent Police Department to implement better police training programs such as diversity and de-escalation training? I think that is a very great question, and one that we need to be focused in on. I've already talked to Amwaba about having some type of public safety summit that brings together students, that brings together our city police officials, our university police officials, our city manager, and really working in partnership with the city of Kent proper to have a police or a public safety summit that talks about ways that we might be able to implement some of these ideas relative to training programs, diversity and de-escalation training, et cetera. So it is an area that we really need to focus in on. Right now, our relationships are fairly good with the entities involved, and I could see this really strengthening those town-gown relations in a positive way.
Agreed.
I'm going to send this question to you, Dr. Gooden.
Okay.
Comes from another student. What commitment does the university plan to keep with the Pan-African Studies Department in terms of offering it as a major and minor for students to study in for the continuation of the university's existence?
So it's interesting. That's the third time I've heard that this week, that there is a potential threat to the Department of Pan-African Studies. And so I can assure you that the university is committed to the success and the preservation of the Department of Pan-African Studies. I think now more than ever, the department can actually be a unit that helps lead the university in this conversation, has much value. And I know over the years, students, in particular Black United students, have really advocated for all students to take, for example, the Black Experience 1 or the Black Experience 2 as offers a really foundational look at race, racism, and structural inequality in the United States. And I would encourage, advisors to encourage their students to actually take those two courses in particular, if not others.
Yeah. How will Kent State better itself in the aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion moving forward into the 2020-2021 school year?
That's it's a huge question, right?
A very big question.
Yeah, because usually, and I'm going to be honest, when I hear questions like that, for me, it seems so big because it puts the responsibility on an entity, and the entity is made up of collection of units and individuals, right? So as an institution, Kent State will have the task force. It will have the division of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It will have centers like the LGBTQ Center and the Student Multicultural Center and the Department of Pan-African Studies. But it's also made up of individuals, right, who make up units and who make up departments. And I think this is a really great opportunity for units to really think, how can I be fiscally responsible to the community at Kent State, but also to the community in which Kent State exists. So we have this individual responsibility to learn as much as we can about race and racism and structural inequality, and then put that effort, put that knowledge to work by advocating, being proactive, and working collectively to making change at our units. So you can have the university of the entity doing all of this work, but at the individual level, right, and in individuals who work, right, with policy, procedures, and process, have to be aware of how those policies, procedures, and process and their actions might negatively impact individuals. So I would say this is a collective effort.
Yeah, yeah. Here's another statement that we might be able to opine on. This comes from a doctoral student. Says, I'm a white single mother. I want to do everything I can to support Black Lives Matter as well as ultimate equality across the country. Frankly, I don't know what all I can do to help support these causes and become a stronger example for my daughter and students. I'm quite fearful to participate in protests due to the potential violence that may occur. This fear makes me feel guilty because I know I am more privileged than others. Although I am a woman and still feel unequal, I know that I still have white privilege, and this privilege makes me sick because even though I'm white, I'm still unequal. Can we have a discussion about that? I think there's a lot embedded in that statement, and I'm so grateful to the doctoral student who was vulnerable enough to acknowledge that and to share her feelings. This notion of white allyship and how can white folks, really rise to the occasion in this moment to be supportive and to be allies and advocates.
Mm-hmm.
How do we go about starting that work? What do we tell somebody who asks this question?
Yeah, so I would say she's actually doing the work, right? So what I hear from that question is somebody who's self-reflective and who has a level of awareness to know that she can bring about change, and she wants to make intentional decisions about how that change is going to come. So you start with the self, learning as much as you can around structural racism, anti-Black racism, and it's not only about this moment, but it's the history and the legacy of anti-Black racism that's embedded in the substructure of American, right, culture, right, and society. So knowing that, it's really interesting. I think that we often feel guilty about whether we should or shouldn't do something, but there's so many decisions that we can make in terms of how we choose to be proactive. And so if you do not want to head to the streets in terms of being a protester, right? You can be a role model for your children, but you can also be an advocate when there's not an individual of color, a Black person sitting in a room or at the table, right? We can push back on those Facebook or Twitter posts on our classmates who are making racist comments, right? There are ways for us to act and be proactive, even though we are not sitting, in the streets. I remember as a student, I used to push back on my professor because I used to call him an armchair revolutionary, right? In my youth, I thought, in my youthful arrogance, I thought because he was not protesting with us, he was not doing enough. What I came to learn later was his advocacy was behind closed doors. And he was the voice, his office was a safe space. So these are the little things that actually make up the whole.
Yeah, I think there are multiple ways to demonstrate your advocacy, your allyship, and even your protest. And I also want to be careful not to have protest and violence coincide synonymously one with the other.
Yes.
I think that is a huge issue that we're experiencing even right now, given what we're seeing around the country. But no one individual protests in the same way. And I think we first have to be okay with that. Yeah. If you're not the one outside holding the sign and leading the crowd, but you are at home writing letters to your elected official or calling your elected officials, or like Amwaba said, addressing things that you see on social media, or even having conversations with your children. My 6-year-old daughter read about tear gas for the first time on CNN last week. And that opened the door to have a very frank conversation with her at six years of age about what is happening in the world. And I think if more people had those conversations and early, we could also begin to change the world in that way as well. So I think it's embracing what makes sense for you. I will just share my own personal opinion that silence for me is complicit. So if you're silent completely, then that's a different conversation. But as long as you're doing something, I think you're right. You're self-reflective and then figuring out what works for you.
Yeah.
So we have some questions about funding, and the funding being inadequate for entities on campus that support students of color, particularly Black students. So here named in the question, or in the statement rather, are places like the SMC, the Student Multicultural Center, places like our academic diversity outreach areas, and how can we be better as an institution with providing adequate levels of funding to support the programs, the services, the initiatives that come out of those places.
Okay, all right. So do you want me to go first with that?
Sure.
Because I can't speak specifically to the SMC and to the other centers. So, and I said this in conversation with somebody this morning, that I do believe that institutions need to avoid a universal or across the board approach to funding. One is that if we are to uphold, and so I'll use the division of diversity, equity, and inclusion to say that division at this time is particularly important, then I do believe that, sorry, I think I've lost, I thought I lost somebody. I do believe that institutions need to be intentional on how funding, mute everybody. Sorry, I was trying to mute everybody. That seems to be better. Can you hear me, Lamar? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, all right, great. Is that institutions need to be intentional on how they are actually providing funding. I'm not sure an all across the board universal approach to funding is the equitable thing to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, I'm just becoming acquainted with the Student Multicultural Center budget now that they are resident in the Division of Student Affairs. And one thing that I can say is we do have to be thoughtful about the way in which we deploy financial resources to support these students and these entities, realizing their importance to the fabric of the campus. And it's a very delicate, it's a hard discussion sometimes because resources are not infinite. And everything seemingly is a priority, right? And so we have to push past that. We have to center equity in decision making relative to financial resources and the ways that those resources are deployed. I can tell you that from my point of view, it's we're nowhere near where we need to be in terms of the funding to really support those entities fully. I desire to do more. And so how we do that is the work and really how we are honest and transparent about how those funding decisions are made, where those funds go, et cetera, becomes our work. So I think the student who illuminated this is exactly right. It's from the tenor of the commentary, I'm assuming that the student is the recipient of many of the services or programs that are in these spaces, and is speaking from a very lived experience about how inadequate funding has impacted their experience. And so we have to do a bit better with that and be ever mindful of our work ahead relative to funding.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and mute all, and I'll just ask if people are going to ask a question just to unmute themselves. I'm hearing some feedback. Okay.
And also in the chat, please make sure you check the chat out. There are so many great resources being shared, curricular resources, thoughts and suggestions about how we are addressing issues of systemic racism. And so please be sure to read the chat as you can so that you can avail yourself of all of those resources. And speaking of the chat, there's a question here from a Black graduate student in STEM who asks, how do you address these issues without being alienated and minimized by your white peers and faculty members?
Yeah. And so let's be real about this, right? So I don't know, I can't say that somebody's not going to be alienated, that there's not going to be retaliation. So this is the real world. So what I say to that student is find an advocate outside of your group and find an advocate inside of your group. So somebody who can speak on your behalf when you are not there. I would say to also connect with somebody who has navigated such an experience that they might help you navigate and provide a clear path for you to take. There are experiences at Kent State I've heard from Black grad students where they have been alienated when they have gone forward with a complaint. I've had chairs reach out to me to help support Black graduate students because they're having a difficult time. So the choice that you make as a grad student is, one, who am I going to share my story with? What help do I want? What do I want to do about this? And how can that person help me, right, get what I want? And then of course there's the mental health and physical anguish that this brings, because it's real. The headaches, the sleepless nights that impact your productivity, your writing time, your research time, and you're measured at the same level that other white students are being measured at without that being taken into consideration. So for that student, I would say in this moment, reach out to me, reach out to Dr. Hilton. If I'm not the person to talk to, I can provide somebody for you to talk to and help you navigate this space. But I also think that the chair of that department, the dean of that department, needs to know what's going on so they can address it at that particular level. And this is what I mean by, so we're going to have the task force and these larger entities that might do anti-racist work. We need to make sure that this work is filtering down to the smallest of units. And so all of our students are leaving Kent State feeling cared for, right, and supported so they can be successful.
Yeah, it's really well said. Dr. Gooden, do you think this is a good point for us to transition to questions from our participants?
I think so. I think so. And I want to say, I did see something in the chat that says the university libraries would help with gathering resources. We're at the point now, both DEI, Lamar, myself, of gathering resources that we want to make available. So if the university libraries, I'm going to take you up on that. So if you could reach out to me, we would love your support, because we have tons of resources that we just have to put together and make it available to everyone.
Sounds great. Sounds great, Amwaba.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
All right.
Yeah,
So
2 questions. And thank you very much, first of all, for organizing this session. And I actually wish you would allowed President Darkon to stay. Certainly nothing has been said here that would not have been said if he had not stayed. But the 2 questions I have, Lamar, you indicated you had seen student postings on Twitter. What were the postings, first of all? What was done about those postings? That's question number 1. And then question number 2, what are instances of administrators being disciplined for maltreatment of Black faculty or maltreatment of Black staff or minority staff under their supervision? What are instances of that at the university? I would say perhaps in the last year or 2, or whatever period you choose to pick to answer that question. And I ask that question largely because much of the problem stems from impunity, that sense that people can maltreat other people and get away with it, not just the sense, but the knowledge that they can get away with it, and they do get away with it. So we have this rubbish going on, and there are task forces that are formed and groups that discuss this, discuss that. And as an institution at college level, institutional level, state level, national level, we still get this rubbish occurring, and it becomes some sort of a harsh reality to everybody when everybody gets to see it up front, as we got to see the tragedy in Minneapolis a fortnight ago. So what you saw on Twitter, what did you see? What was done about it? What are instances of staff, administrators or supervisors facing some repercussions for maltreatment of Black people they supervise, either as faculty or as staff members?
yeah, thanks for the question, Dr. Nettie. You know, those posts on social media, I think really, again, illuminate a very problematic experience. For those who I have relationships with or even know based on their profiles on Twitter, I have reached out to just say, you know, I'm sorry that that was your experience. Here I am to support you in any way possible. And I think that goes away, you know, to a certain extent. But I do think that there's more that we can do holistically to really begin to listen to those voices and listen to those experiences and allow those experiences to inform our practice and our way forward. So we haven't taken direct action on institutional direct action on what we've read, or at least what I've read that I'm aware of. What I'm hopeful, though, is that we can bring those voices to bear and those experiences to bear as we are thinking about what does an anti-racist Kent State look like, given what we've read directly from our students who are posting very frank and open instances where they have been microaggressed or where they have experienced outright racism I'm hopeful that we can utilize those to inform, again, our way forward in our practice as we move forward.
I think everybody is looking for what is there something specific that we can do that can make a difference. And let me give one suggestion that may seem a bit off course since we're talking about Kent State. And this comes from my journalistic background. But I truly believe one thing that we can do is everybody can call their local television stations and ask a single question. Why don't your reporters question their members of Congress and hold them accountable? When Donald Trump insults and calls people names, do you approve of that? When Donald Trump lies all the time, do you approve of that? When Donald Trump sexually harasses women, do you approve of that? Because silence in the face of racism is not an option. Silence in the face of sexism is not an option. And one of the major reasons we have the problems that we do right now is because of the failure of local television journalists. They don't hold anybody accountable, and that's not the reporter's fault. That's corporate behavior. Our corporate owners do not give a damn about the country. They do not give a damn about democracy. And if we change that, if we start holding members of Congress accountable, my God, you have Senator Rob Portman who couldn't answer questions because he said he was late for lunch. What the heck is going on? When I started in the journalism business, my God, when you called a member of Congress, they called you back. And we can hold them accountable, because what we are seeing happening at a national level is corporate greed is killing journalism, and the lack of basic journalism is killing democracy. And we need to be, just like years ago, the Nashville Tennessean, sat there and reported on what was happening with the race riots. We need to hold these sons of bitches accountable. And we need to do that at the local level as well.
And so do you recommend that? Are you recommending that people begin to call their news station, their local radio and news stations?
Yeah, particularly the television stations. They make bundles of money on political advertising.
Okay.
You can't find a single television station in Ohio that covers the state legislature. State after state after state after state has passed laws to restrict voting. And you can't find an interview with a reporter questioning a legislature before that happens. Why are you doing that? Journalism is failing. And when journalism fails in a democracy, the democracy is failing. What we are witnessing right now is a collapse of American democracy. And if we don't bring back journalism, this country is doomed.
Thank you. Someone else?
Hi, I don't know how to raise my hand here, but I can speak.
Okay.
Have we thought university-wide, to Carl's point and many points brought up, of making time and space and helping students get to the polls this election year, perhaps even closing the university on election day and focusing our energies on getting students and getting everyone to vote?
Mm-hmm. So a great question. I know that was a question that was actually also poised in our when people submitted questions before. And I know that Lamar was going to talk about the voting initiative that Kent State has. I don't know if There has been conversation about closing the university and getting people to vote. I think it should actually be, a vision or a mission that we have this year in particular. I know that and the department level, in terms of the Pan-African Studies Department, we actually are partnering with an external community organizer who will have office space in the department that will work with students around voting. And I know Lamar will talk a little bit about Kent State Voting Initiative that they have. Other than that, I'm not sure what else exists, and maybe somebody on the call does.
Yeah, I can share a little bit about what we call the Kent State Votes project that actually started last year as a way to build capacity for voting and build the awareness of the importance of voting as we were leading up to this year's primary. And I am told that Kent State Votes initiative that is spearheaded by Craig Berger and University College through Community Engaged Learning, and in partnership with our undergraduate student government and our graduate student senate, along with many partners around the university, will ramp back up for the fall to do a lot of the voter registration, literature. I know that at one point last year, the League of Women Voters was tied into this work. And so we do have a coordinated initiative. I would invite anyone who's interested in learning more about Kent State Votes to reach out to Craig Berger. I hope he doesn't mind me putting him on the spot if he's on the call. I will ask for forgiveness later, but I think it's an important initiative at our institution that, again, really emerged out of some work and conversations with our students that if there are questions or interest in getting involved, Craig Berger, BERGER, and the Community Engaged Learning Office would be your best point of contact.
Thanks, Lamar. Other questions?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I wanted to know, from an admissions perspective, are there conscious or will there be conscious efforts to direct students of color to STEM programs, and so they can see, I'm in IT, and I do not see a lot of students that look like me, and I wanted to see, just period, over my 15 years of teaching IT, is there a conscientious effort to direct students of color to STEM programs, to the engineering, to the programming that's going to help them to make a lot of money?
Okay, all right, thank you for the question. So, and somebody on the call can correct me if I'm wrong. So to the best of my knowledge, there was an individual that worked through DEI and that worked in partnership with Academic Affairs, and that person is no longer with the university, that worked with individuals of color, graduate students in particular, but it might have also been undergraduates, to funnel them into STEM. I'm also, and I think Dean Pringle, Ebony, is on the call, and I believe through University College that there is a focus on recruiting students of color for STEM. Would you correct me if I'm wrong, Ebony?
Hi, everyone. This is Ebony. Thank you, Dr. Gooden. Actually, we do not have a specific focus on recruiting for STEM, but we do work with students who are interested in doing research in STEM. And so once they're already here, many of you are aware of the McNair Scholars Program, and we recruit students who are interested in the STEM fields to do research, and that's at the sophomore level once they're here as a Kent State student.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Pringle.
I have a question.
Hi.
Hi. How can we get
Hi,
directly?
Todd.
Hi, Lamar. Thank you. How can we get directly involved and or support the task force?
Great question. Lamar, do you want to take that?
Sure. So we are, there will be likely multiple ways to get involved, Todd. The group the initial group, as Mwaba shared earlier, will be representatives from the student body, the faculty, the staff, and the administration. We're trying to keep that steering group a bit smaller in number to be nimble in our work. But obviously, once we start rolling out the work and rolling out the action plans, that's really how people can really help get involved. Our students will have representation, both students, undergraduate students as well as grad students. Then we're trying to find a good balance between to staff, to faculty, to administrators to make sure that there is a good representation at all levels of the organizational chart among all classifications, if at all possible. So you might imagine it's a delicate dance in terms of making sure we're attending to all of those dynamics. I think the best way is to give us your feedback, give us your perspective, give us your thought, and when these action plans start rolling out, be ready to jump into the work of really executing the action plans. We do plan to look at the recommendations from the USC Equity Institute that Dr. Gooden shared about, along with the recommendations that came out of the ad hoc on race as a starting point for our work, and then expanding beyond that as the task force gets underway. So you will definitely hear, trust me, you are in the Division of Student Affairs, you have no choice but to hear about what will be coming out of the work relative to the anti-racism task force.
Yes. And let me add that the anti-racist task force will not be the only, right? The only, I don't know, thing to address anti-Black racism and racism. There are multiple other things that will be geared towards addressing that. So the USC project, or the that training actually led to 4 projects. And I know Dr. Pringle and Dr. Grimm are on the call, and they participated in the USC Race and Equity Institute. So they might want to chime in on this. But those 4 projects that the key stakeholders came up with will also address inequity, right, as well as race. One of the visions I have for DEI is to actually decentralize the work of DEI and to work with each unit across campus to come up with a strategic plan that will address equity, inequity. So we're talking about, so race, of course, will be a part of that. And I think in thinking about race, we also have to think about, you know, our community members with multiple identities, right? And how those identities intersect, creating a particular form of oppression that is, you know, multi-focused, right? So it might be gender embedded with race, embedded with sexual orientation, sexual identity, and all of that. So I really want to share that there'll be multiple things on campus that will address inequity. I don't know if Dr. Pringle or Dr. Grimm want to share anything about the USC Institute and the projects in particular.
I can speak a little bit to the project you and I, Mwaba, are trying to move forward. And that really is very much reflected in this effort right here. Hearing from people about their concerns, their experiences, their interests, and trying to coalesce those into a better understanding of what's actually happening on campus, and then develop something like a shared vision of what we mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion at Kent State University, and generally the kind of actions that would support that. That's how I think of the big picture of all the little pieces we've got going.
Yeah. And
I would just like to say a reminder on how important whistleblowers are, to be able to speak up and say what is going on. We live in the only country in the world where a university gives a full scholarship to someone who cannot even read a college textbook so they can play football. And we need to have some ethics. And ethics are incredibly important. we should be concerned. You know, I certainly would have encouraged my son to play football. My grandfather was a lifelong football coach. One of my earliest Christmas presents was a football helmet, one of the leather ones. And now, you know, football causes brain damage. And you don't have a single university president in the Division I objecting to a sport that causes brain damage. We need to stand up and say education is more important than football. We need to have ethics at a university. Ethics should be important. And ethics at this university currently is not. And that's a real disappointment.
Thank you. Ebony?
Yes, I was just going to share, going back to your question around the Institute, who would even think we would be right here today at this very pivotal moment that I think the Institute laid a foundation for us to, I think, approach this in a way that's authentic and also important for our university. What I most appreciated about the Institute was the clarification of our values as an institution and the conversation and plans around how do we communicate those values in a salient and authentic way. So I'm excited to be able to carry forward those projects. And I think this is an opportunity, today's town hall and the ones that will follow, to further refine those projects, to really be in line with what our university is calling us to do as leaders. So I'm very appreciative to have participated, and I'm looking forward to sharing that more broadly with our community.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm excited to be working on those projects this year. Right now, as you said, it's more important now more than ever.
I had a question. Mine is very nuts and boltsy. We have sort of two things working in parallel. We have students of color who need our support. You already talked about a mechanism that will be put into place that's sort of easily accessible for faculty who want to support a student who's had one of those experiences. But we also have students in the classroom with a faculty member who is, I'm going to give them credit, like well-intentioned, but has a difficult time managing white students who express knowingly or unknowingly racist points of view. And I'm wondering if there's a training component to this, not only to train faculty on how to sort of function fairly in a diverse classroom, because I'm not sure we have enough training for that purpose, but also how to address specifically, and I think it's about hearing, also how to hear what a student of color might be hearing that a white faculty member might miss, and then how to address that to keep the classroom sort of as a whole, but also to ensure that that student, you know, that student is being validated at the same time as correcting in a positive way the student that has sort of reflected some race bias. So I'm wondering if there's like a component or if there's a sort of a plan that might help address those kinds of issues, because we do have, it is an election year, and you know, some people are going to be in a face-to-face space, other people will have remote work, people still are having conversation, and I have some real concerns about the very polarized environment we are in, and we do draw students from, you know, all different spectrums of the political world, and I think there needs to be some kind of training to help facilitate those conversations, because they can arise spontaneously in all different kinds of classes.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. So, and I know that DEI has training labs that would address and could address issues of anti-bias. I do think in this instance, I think working collectively with Faculty Senate, with the faculty unions on campus and academic affairs, along with diversity, equity, and inclusion, we should, and I would hope that we come up with a solution to this issue. So Lamar had mentioned earlier the hashtag Black at Kent State University speaks specifically and just profoundly. I was so sad to see the experiences of our particularly Black students on the campus and what they face in the classroom. And I hope that all of these entities would be able to come together to provide some kind of a training for faculty that's not immediate. It's not just about this moment, but embed this training in the system moving forward so that faculty are using that as professional development opportunities, using it to be reflective. And also I'm hoping that faculty can really begin to check each other, you know, in the hallways, at the table, you know, over wine, having beer, and calling each other out about their behavior. Because I think oftentimes individuals who are perpetrators get away with it because we remain silent. We've got to begin to call each other out. I think Carl used the term whistleblower, right? Whatever term we want to use, we need to begin to call each other out. There's much power in action. And I think Lamar said it earlier, right? Right? About inaction, although I can't really say what he said because he said it so eloquently.
Silence is complicit.
That's it. Silence is complicit.
Silence is complicit.
Yeah. Did I answer your question, Linda?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question that maybe follows up with that? My name is Eric Oakley. I'm the softball coach here at Kent State, and this is awesome to see everybody here. Kind of along those lines, do we work with our students in orientation? You know, for a lot of students, when they come to college, it's the first time they've ever had a professor who is African American, or you know, or a roommate or a hallmate, and again, they can say things insensitively without intent, or maybe with intent. But where are we in the educating our students as they come in, even maybe starting as early as campus tours and orientation? But are there opportunities, even, you know, like I said, at orientation or at commencement, where they're learning not to say these things? This is insensitive. This is saying something that's going to offend a professor or a classmate, and those kind of things.
Thanks for the question. I'm going to invite Sonia is on the call, and maybe Lamar can help answer this question. So I do know, and they'll correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes there's not a mandatory training for students. So units can invite and have invited individuals from diversity, equity, inclusion to come and provide a training for their students. And so to the best of my knowledge, that's what currently exists. And both Sonia, I think Sonia can speak to that as well as Lamar.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I included in our chat box the link for DEI training, and there are a number of courses, training modules that we present to faculty, staff, and students. And this past academic year, we were called on by several student groups and also different programs to talk to students about their biases, microaggressions, ways to identify and recognize and how to dismantle those internal biases. And so we have been working to remotely present these trainings virtually as well. And so in the chat, if you have a class, if you have a student group, if you have a staff meeting or what have you, and you think that we can provide this very important training, these trainings, please reach out to us. There's a sign-in portal as well. We'll call you, we'll talk about, you know, what's really happening in your environment, what it is you want us to do. And we are able to customize, if we don't already have it, based on your needs. And so I know that Lamar's area will often refer student groups to us. And again, so we've been able to really help in that effort.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to answer this in two different ways. One, the first way is that, yes, we do offer opportunities for students via the very ways that Sonia just outlined. There's also our peer leader training course that again is a function of our student success programs out of University College that peer leaders embark upon, that these opportunities or these conversations and dialogues are embedded into that experience through the course. And these are our budding RAs, our DKS leaders, et cetera. So it hits, wide swaths of our student leadership population in terms of the people who comprise that course. The second way I'm going to answer that question, though, is we still have work to do in this area. We don't have anything mandatory, and I think this is wrapped up into the desire from particularly our Black students to see themselves reflected in the curriculum. I don't think that it starts with their first class. I actually think that it starts with their first encounter with Kent State University and the ways that we're uplifting the values of equity and inclusion and justice from the onset, and being able to demonstrate that. We have our institutional moniker of Flashes takes care of Flashes, which I think is fantastic. And I think it provides yet another platform for us to really deepen this work on behalf of people who look like me, students who look like me. And so I think that this is an area where we certainly can build upon what we already have. We can do better than what we're doing. And I think we really have a rich and prime opportunity in this moment to really examine what would be the best experience and the best way for students to get that knowledge, to get that perspective, to understand what we care about and what we value as an institution when it comes to equity and when it comes to inclusive excellence.
So I just saw a comment in the chat, and I wanted to make a comment on it. It was about my point about speaking up and speaking out. And so I wanted to be clear that the decision to speak up and speak out is actually an individual choice. And my comment was really for white folks in the space. So when a person of color, Black individual, decides to speak out against racism, there is a risk that they're taking, whether it's they're untenured or they are staff and they're on contract. There's a fear of losing their job. So that's a decision that one makes about standing up and speaking out. And I applaud those that do, but I also understand at the most intimate level those that who do not, because they're very fearful for their jobs. They've been threatened. But for white folks who want to be allies, I'm talking about standing up and speaking out in that regard. But I say that not to manage and take over the situation, but to check in with the individual who has been armed. What do they want you to do? Do they want you to be an advocate? How can you help? So my suggestion would be first to check with that individual and then act. It's really important, because I think sometimes those lines can become really blurred and confusing. And there will be that How to Be an Ally session next Thursday that might help with this conversation. And again, this is just not a one-off conversation. We're hoping to have multiple conversations and sessions over a period of time to build individuals' comfort level with dealing with racist act and racism on Kent State's campus.
Hey, Dr. Gooden.
Yes.
Hi, this is Mike Daniels from the Student Multicultural Center. I just wanted to chime in briefly. I know a lot of folks have mentioned some different ways that we can engage with our faculty, staff, and then the question was about students, I think Linda had raised. I do want to share that something that we're working on in the Student Multicultural Center is a white identity exploration. Other institutions and areas that do diversity training offer this as an option for folks to explore their identity and race as a white person, and it helps develop empathy, obviously consciousness and awareness. There's a lot of research that goes into this, but overall it's a strategy in fighting against racism. So it's anti-racism development. So that's something that we plan to offer. We're in the developmental phases with this, but like all the trainings that the SMC does, it'll be open to students, faculty, and staff. So just keep that on your radar, because I think that's another way to develop allyship as well as awareness overall to some of the challenges that people of color and specifically Black people face.
Thanks, Mike.
I have a question, if you don't mind.
Hi, Emmett.
Hi, I miss you, by the way. So I have two questions. I'm a counselor in training now at my internship, but I have two things kind of on my mind. One is I know that there seems to be a stigma in the Black and Brown communities over reaching out for mental health counseling and stuff like that. I'm wondering, you know, if anybody had any ideas, or I'm willing to kind of start an initiative to kind of try to break that stigma at Kent State. My other question is, there seems to be a disparity with, you know, people not being able to find Black counselors, you know, people that look like them. And I'm wondering, what can we do at Kent State to kind of help bring more people of color in to become counselors, to break that disparity?
Emmett, you are speaking my language. You are really, you're tugging at my heartstrings, friend, because this is yet another area that we really have got to focus in on, that we have no choice. Our psychological services area and those who are providing just general counseling support across the university, be it in psych services, the counseling center, you know, psychological sciences, this is an area that comes up as a gap, a very significant gap. Both of those issues that you've just named. I would be happy to connect you with staff in the psychological services area to figure out how we address the stigma and break down the stigma for students accessing counseling related support. I think both of your points go hand in hand, that there is a perception that there's not anybody there that looks like me that would really understand my experience as a Black person and the mental health issues that come with that. I think that's a part of the conversation for certain. It's not the entirety, but it certainly is a part. I would be happy to engage with anyone and everyone to figure out, how do we break down this stigma, and then how do we identify and deepen our commitment to hiring counseling staff that is reflective of the student body, that is reflective of the university community, that is reflective of the community that we live in. That is something that is at top of mind for me. We have been requesting and putting together plans of how we're going to address mental health, broadly speaking, as an institution. And certainly this is one of those areas, one of those recommendations that we really need to hone in on, especially given the times and the tensions that are heightened. But not only because of that, we need to do it because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emmett.
I have a question that's, all right.
Hi, Ed.
Hi. I understand that we've had this big move with a lot of the DEI centers moving to student affairs, and I don't know if Todd is still on or who's on, but I'd like to know that there's still the same, and I understand we have to reduce funding for everyone, but I'd like to understand that there's still the same commitment to those centers, every single one of them, and all the important work they do, and the DEI division that there always was, no matter how it's organized. And I would like to hear someone just voice some support for that.
Well, let me give you what you want, Ed. Yes, there is significant importance and relevance for the Student Multicultural Center, for the LGBTQ+ Center, for the Women's Center, for the Center for Sexual and Relationship Violence Support Services, and for Diversity and Inclusion Leadership, the 5 areas that have recently moved from DEI to the Division of Student Affairs. In the conversations as we were transitioning, Dr. Gooden and I were very clear with all staff members impacted by that move, that just because they are moving organizational lines and just because they are moving from one division to the other does not mean that they lose their connection to the equity and inclusion work that has been before them as institutions. I myself, Ed, am a former director of a student multicultural center in a previous position before becoming a vice president, and am keenly aware of the importance, the relevance, the impact that those centers have on a university experience for all community members, not just students. And so you have my staunch commitment that the work will continue. The work will continue to matter. We will continue to find ways to elevate the work. We will continue to find ways to support the students that are most impacted by that work. And that we will do that in partnership and in concert with our diversity, equity, and inclusion areas. I talk to Dr. Gooden probably every day of the week, it seems like. And we are constantly and critically examining how we best partner, how we best align, how we best think about the overarching experience for diverse, identified, and marginalized groups, and then how we support that through the work of those centers. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. It is something that I have a lived experience with, and it's something that I look forward to helping the university to really understand how this will continue and be strengthened, even though we're in a new organizational line, even though we're in a new organizational structure. For me, that has no bearing on the need and the necessity for those centers to continue to thrive.
Thank you, Lamar. I appreciate that response. That's what I was hoping to hear. I did see there was a question about, are we talking about the regional campuses too in the chat room? But I believe that would be the case. I'll go away now. Amaba, you're muted.
That's because I was coughing and I didn't want everybody to hear me cough before. Thank you, Ed. So I was thanking Lisa for raising the question about the regional campus. Certainly, we are committed to working equally with the regional campus, and we're going to be very intentional to make sure that we're working with those campuses in all the decisions that we're making, but also making sure that we are making accessible opportunities for individuals from the regional campus to join the conversations. I think certainly the pandemic has demonstrated one of the ways that we can actually respond and provide equal access to everybody. So I think it's key because the regional campuses are facing their own specific issues.
Dr. Gooden, it's looking like people are having to go to other endeavors.
Okay.
And I know we're right at an hour and a half. Do we want to maybe wrap this up for today, realizing that we do have other town hall experiences coming up in the next couple of weeks?
Sure. Yes. Thank you. So I just want to reiterate that we will have multiple town halls. This is the first one. Tomorrow there will be a session for Black, African American, and people of color who identify in those categories to focus on specific issues. We'll have 2 student town halls that Black United students and undergraduate student government will be leading. And then we'll have another town hall on how to be an ally. And now these will occur over the next couple of weeks. It's kind of the first step in addressing what is going on immediately. Over the long term, you're going to see more town halls and more opportunities to be in conversation with leadership, but also with each other. This is an anti-racist effort. And I can't say that enough. This is an anti-racist effort. We're addressing anti-Black racism. We're also addressing other forms of racism because we have to look at the ways in which race intersect with all, with other various forms of identity. So we're looking at race, but also the way it would intersect with other forms of identity. We can't do this work individually. We have to be proactive, and it has to be a collective effort. It won't be one organization, one group, one task force. It has to be collective, and it has to be system-wide. And I'm committed through the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office, but also through the Department of Pan-African Studies and as a member of this community to help bring some change to Kent State.
And I just echo and thank you all for taking time out on a weekday, on a work day after 5 o'clock. And really having what I believe to be some really great first starts of a conversation, a continued conversation that will happen. This has really been therapeutic in many ways for me as a Black man personally and professionally, and I'm glad to be in community with Kent State folks that really are committed to the cause of making our institution better around anti-Black racism. And so I thank you all for availing yourselves of your time this evening, and look forward to working with our community in partnership and arm in arm as we address this for our campus. And thank you publicly, Dr. Gooden, for your leadership and your partnership. It has been a joy to work with you.
You also, Dr. Hilton, thank you. And thanks everyone. Again, information about the town hall will be provided through Constant Contact. The Ally has not gone out yet, the invite or the student sessions have not gone out. Those will be forwarded to the community fairly soon. Thanks everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Dear. Thank you, Amoeba. So nice. And what a noteworthy quote. Race intersects with
Hi, Uma, how are you?
I'm fine, dear. I logged in twice, but it said that, you know, there were more than 300 people and I couldn't get in. And
I'm sorry.
No,
Oh
that's
my
okay.
goodness.
It's okay. And I kept waiting and I said, I'm not going to give up till I get it.
Okay, I'm glad that you stayed. And I think I didn't realize it was capped at 300. I think I can cap it at 500. So the next time I'll make sure that it's set at the limit. We're going to have to come up, I think, with a platform that can hold more than 500 people.
Oh my God, I would love that. And I said, I'm not giving up. I'm sitting here and I kept, you know, logging, but I was able to get in. So I'm so happy to hear you.
Okay,
Two things that I must say. What a beautiful quote. You just said it so beautifully. Race intersects with all forms of identity. My God, that's a quotable quote. And silence is complicit.
Yes, that was a mark. Yes.
Two things that, you know what, it has to be, it hits back again and again. And, you know, and
yes,
being a woman of color, I constantly come across this, and I try to tell my students many times that, you know, we have to prove ourselves twice the way we should. We have to be at it. Sometimes my students don't like it, but you know what? It doesn't matter. We are all working, and we are all, and thank you for having this. You are a true leader, and I admire what you're doing. Thank you. Truly, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone. Thanks so much for coming.